Hey everybody, Nick here, and today we're going to be a little introspective and a little retrospective and talk about my gear of the year, my knife of the year nominees for every single year the channel's been in existence. I'm going to answer some questions, not only like what were they, but more specifically, how do I feel about them with 2021 vision? Do I still carry them? What have my opinions changed over time? So kind of looking back at my choices for each year and thinking a little bit more, both critically about my own opinions at the time and thinking about how they fit in 2021. So, first off, though, before I go any further, I want to thank my Patreon patrons. Their financial support makes the channel possible, as does their forming a very kind community. They make the channel possible in an entirely different way. Each and every one of you are absolute gems, and I very much appreciate your ongoing support. Thank you. Next thing, let's just introduce the cast of characters. 2016 brought this little guy. This is actually the newest knife on my table. This is a very recent production one. This was done only recently and released via the Alambic table, but I saw it, was like, oh, that's nice. I got to do that because it's got a very nice outrun sort of aesthetic. Got a very nice clip to it. This is a very nice example of the 247, and the 247 was my knife of the year in 2016. I think a lot of things did it for me at the time. Had a very, very smooth action, still does. Very good, reliable flipping action, and as well as just a whole bunch of really nice ergonomics, and just really cool. The idea that you can customize it to your heart's content, well, that's a beautiful thing. And so the 247 here was a very clear choice in 2016, and was my knife of the year. 2017, Alambic got it again. This time with this particular knife. Actually, not this particular knife, but with this model, the Alambic Busker. The Busker, the original one I had, actually got stolen at a certain point. I've replaced it with this guy right here. But nonetheless, the Busker combined a variety of ways to be open. Not only is it a front flipper, if you'd like it to, but you can flick it out using the hole. There are a bunch of different ways to open the Busker, but it's also a very small, compact little knife. It was very, very carryable, and again, it had that customizability. It had the ability to make something that was uniquely yours, that I think is very much a nice thing. And so the Busker cleaned up in 2017 and won my knife of the year. Year following saw the release of the TRM Neutron, and that made my choice real easy. This was a knife that was very thin and slicey in the blade, that was very thin in the pocket, that was very, very lightweight, and made in the States out of 20 CV. There's really not a lot wrong with the original Neutron. They've made some improvements since, but at the same time, the Neutron is a good knife. Fundamentally, it has been since day one, and this one cleaned up in 2018 without a whole lot of effort. And it's no surprise, given how good the Neutron was, that when they released the sort of follow-up model to it, the Atom, which is both bigger as well as fundamentally different. They've gone from this is, by the way, the Neutron 1.0, but they went from a bare liner construction like this to nested liners as well. They did a lot more contouring to it, so it felt like a rounded piece rather than a slab of carbon fiber on top of a slab of titanium. They thinned out the grind yet further, and they continued to improve on all the things that were really good about it before, adding also a deep carry clip. The Atom was, in a lot of ways, there's a clear line between these two. Clear familial resemblance, if you will, but at the same time, it was different enough that I had no problem calling this guy Knife of the Year for 2019. 2020 saw the release of the ProTech Knives Malibu. This is a really nice piece. ProTech is a company that for a long time was known mostly for automatic knives. They've always had a couple of non-autos, but it's been sort of accidental in their grand scheme of knives they're out there releasing. This guy sort of put them back on the map for manual open folders because it is using a button lock, which is very, very good, but it is not an automatic knife. If I just press the button, nothing happens. You need to engage the flipper tab to deploy the knife, but when you do, oh boy, does it deploy. Got the detent down well, and they've also done a number of other nice things. For instance, they've got a grind that's nice and thin. That's something they've improved a lot on in their recent work, right? But it's also very nicely constructed. It's also very nicely machined. This particular one happens to be a Damascus steel and a titanium handle, but nonetheless, the Malibu was a piece that was a very, very, very good knife and a pretty clear winner last year. And then this year, the one I ended up settling on was this little guy right here. This is the Tactile Knives Bexar, B-E-X-A-R. Yes, it's a silly name. Yes, Texans, I know it's the county that they're... Yeah, I'm aware. Thank you very much. Still, no one knows how to pronounce it outside Texas. So the Bear here is a really cool knife in one main dimension, and that's this one. This is a knife that is absurdly thin, both in terms of the blade, leading to a very, very thin, slicey cutting edge, but also in terms of the handle, making this guy carry like crazy. It just disappears in the pocket, which is a beautiful thing. And given that it's also from a brand new company, Tactile Knife Company, oh boy, was this a nice choice. This is a very, very nice knife, and given that it's their second they made, that was super duper exciting. It's worth mentioning, I am going to go ahead and I'm going to make the honorable mention of the Quiet Carry Drift, because I was very much on the fence between the Drift and the Bear here. Both of them are really, really nice knives. The Drift is completely stainless. Every part of it is meant to be stainless. They finally nailed the detent after they had a lot of trouble with detent in 2019, I believe, for the original Drift. It's in Van Axe steel. There's a lot to love about the Drift, and in a lot of ways, both of these guys could have won. And in fact, this did take my overall Gear of the Year in my podcast with Tony, even though I gave this one Knife of the Year. Both of these could belong here, and so I'll probably talk a little bit about both of them, but nonetheless, these are my choices for Gear of the Year for all of the years that the channel has been in existence. One of the common questions I get is, well, Nick, looking back at the world, do you think it would be different, right? If I had to make the call again, would I do the same thing? Well, in a lot of ways, that's really tough, right? Because every one of these things was compared to the pieces that were that were adjacent to them, compared to the stuff that came out around the same time. And I do believe, looking back, that I did make the right call with each one of these. That said, if you were to transplant some of these guys into the modern era, they might not be the choice. And in fact, you can see places where both the market has changed, as well as where my taste has changed. One of the things, a good example of that actually is the Wayfarer. This is a great knife, undisputably. But it has a few things that, as I've kind of gotten further in the knife hobby and gotten more experience, do actually bug me a little bit. This proprietary pivot, although given that they include a tool there, but as I always say, proprietary pivot where they give you the tool is like kicking you in the nuts and giving someone an ice pack. Like, sure, that's better, but don't do it to start with. So the proprietary pivot does still bug me, right? And that's not something that's great. And this is also quite a pocket pecker. This, in fact, I believe was the originator of the term pocket pecker, because this little flipper tab is going to be pecking on whatever's in your pocket all day long. So in a lot of ways, the 247 is not something that, if this released tomorrow, this might not have won my Gear of the Year. It's also the case that the rest of the market has caught up in a lot of ways. At the time, certainly there were a lot of companies doing nice actions, but Olemic was way further towards the top, so to speak. Other people have kind of raised up to meet that bar. And so in a lot of ways, I think the 247 is the best knife of 2016 that I saw on my table. I want to be clear about that. This is all relative to the stuff I saw. But I'm not necessarily sure it would be the best knife of 2022 if it were released in a week and a half here. Another good example actually is the Busker. The Busker is a knife that is absolutely great, but there are a couple of things that drive me a little bit crazy about it. The biggest of which is that the edge is very thick, right? I have done a lot of extra sharpening here to try and get that edge thinned out a little bit, but unfortunately, they just ground this one pretty thick. And that's something that I never particularly cared for. This blade shape, the Largo blade, rather than the other one, which I think was called Semper, is a little bit thicker still. And so that is something that bugs me a little bit and makes this guy cut a little less well than it could have otherwise had they really thinned out that grind. The other issue with the Busker, and the reason that this guy, among all of the knives here, doesn't actually get carried that much, is the Whippersnapper. This was another Olemic knife that came out shortly after. And up against things like the Atom and the Neutron, it didn't quite make the cut. It probably could have in a different year where we didn't have such strong entrants, but the Whippersnapper is in a lot of ways, I think, the evolution of the Busker, because it has some of the same great ergonomics. It has not that different of a size, right? I mean, yes, the Busker is smaller, but the Whippersnapper is not that much bigger, right? But the Whip Snap is just a really nice knife with a thinner edge, with, I would say, better ergonomics. In a lot of ways, if I'm going to carry a small Olemic, this is probably the one that's going to end up in my pocket rather than the Busker itself. The Busker's great, but I think the Whippersnapper has kind of outclassed it. And so if I kind of had the ability to replace if the Whippersnapper had come out that year, then, but nonetheless, so the Whip Snap in a lot of ways has supplanted the Busker in my collection. And if I'm going to carry a small Olemic, that's absolutely the place I'm going to go. The Neutron is actually a knife that has been replaced. I still have read this one, and no, it's not for sale. But this has been replaced by the Neutron 2. At the moment, the Neutron 2 is wearing a set of titanium scales from DRM, but you can get it in any variety of scales. That's part of the appeal, right? But the Neutron 2 actually went back and did a bunch of things that they got right on the Atom and did them better on the Neutron. They thinned out the edge just a little bit more. They enhanced the action a little bit. They went to a deep carry clip rather than the shallower carry clip that we had on the original Neutron. And they nested the liners. It's harder to see on the titanium version, but you can see the liners are right here, and then the rest of them, they dive back underneath the scales, as opposed to on this guy, where they are right in the middle there. There's more contouring, too. The Neutron 2 is, in my estimation, a better knife in every meaningful way. I prefer the Neutron 2, and would rather carry the Neutron 2 on a daily basis, and so, for me, in my life, actually, the 2 has pretty neatly supplanted the number 1. The 1 is still a great knife, but, you know, that's what happens when you improve it. It gets better. So, for me, in a lot of ways, the Neutron has been replaced there. The Atom remains a really nice knife. And in a lot of ways, though, I'll say that I carry the Atom less than I do the Neutron 2. And that once they made the Atom improvements to the Neutron, then the smaller form factor, and it is substantially smaller, wins the day. I tend to prefer smaller knives, and so I don't need the Atom as often as I need the Neutron, but the Atom remains a really great piece, and if I had a preference for larger knives, I bet this would end up in my pocket a whole bunch, because it remains quite good. The Malibu is still pretty recent, but no regrets here. This remains a great knife. I don't carry, well, frankly, as a reviewer and a collector with too damn many knives, I don't carry any one knife too often anyways, just because variety is the spice of life, but this is one that I'm very happy to carry. Yeah, they could probably make, yeah, they could probably make some improvements, but at the same time, dude, it's just freaking good. The Malibu remains amazing. And these guys obviously were just chosen, right? So there's nothing to really replace them. But they do both get some carry. For me, they're both really, really great pieces. So that kind of answers the question of, like, looking back with 2021 vision, although actually I could address that with the other ones. If this were released in 2022, like I said, I don't know that this would be the winner, partly because of the proprietary pivot, the pocket pecking. It's still great, but it might not compete as well as it did in 2016. Busker, like I said, it couldn't beat out the whippersnapper these days, so that probably wouldn't have been the winner here. The Neutron 2, I kind of took out of the running just because it really did feel like if I gave Knife of the Year to the Neutron 2, that feels like cheating, right? Because it is substantially a Neutron. The Atom had a different size. It had a bunch of tweaks to it, but this is just sort of an upgrade there. And if I allow upgrades to existing winners to win, then I don't know. But the Neutron 1, well, like I said, the Neutron 2 could beat it out, but at the same time, the Neutron is still a great piece. And in full titanium, it becomes something entirely different, which is entirely compelling in and of itself. The Atom, again, it kind of remains the thing. If the Malibu were released in 2021, honestly, that might have been, it would have been a very, very strong contender. Putting it up against these three, frankly, I'm just glad I didn't have to make that decision, right? Because this is great. These are great as well. I don't know which one I would have called if that were the brand new release. And honestly, yeah, they're just really, really, really good. All of these have retained their gem status, albeit for different reasons. So, you know, in a lot of ways, I think that addresses a lot of the questions that people have for me about my past Knife of the Year things. I don't really have any regrets. Everything's next to each other. I mean, everything is next to the competition of that particular year. And there have definitely been some ones where it was like, oh, well, you know, this got disqualified because there was really strong competition. I would say the Drift is maybe the best. The Drift 2, that is maybe the best sort of example of that, right? But the Whippersnapper is another really nice example. Had we not gotten the Neutron, it's very possible, or was that the Atom year? I forget, but it's very possible that this guy could have been a winner there. And there's a lot of suffering in picking these out, right? Everybody, you know, the week after I release that is the week of the internet telling me I'm wrong, as opposed to every other week where the internet mostly tells me I'm wrong. But nonetheless, you know, every time I do something like this, there are a lot of people who disagree, and of course, I'm curious about your own thoughts on the process here. But at the same time, yeah, that's kind of where I land. All of these guys remain in my collection, although in practice, I carry the Neutron 2 more, and in practice, I carry the Whippersnapper more than the Busker. But all of these guys remain in my collection, and this guy just got added to my collection, partly for history's sake and partly because it's a really badass-looking knife. But at the same time, all of these are there. All of these do get carried, although, again, the atom gets carried less than the neutron just because, well, of the size of it. But nonetheless, so that's where I'm at with it. I hope this has been interesting to you. It is always interesting to kind of go back and look at the knife world and, frankly, how far we've changed, how much we've changed. If I think about the knife world in 2016, it's a very different place than it is in 2021 in a bunch of different ways, right? A bunch of different ways. I mean, 2015, 2016 was in a lot of ways sort of we're heading out of the tactical overbuilt fad, and now we're very clearly out of that fad, which, by the way, oh my God, thank you! And in a lot of ways, I think my choices represent the drift slowly away from that fad. But nonetheless, I mean, the world has changed a great deal in those past years. But and a number of people who asked, where we want me to do a video about how the knife industry's changed, and I just don't have enough experience to do that. But hopefully this kind of accounts for some of that. So, anyways, there you go. I'll stop rambling. Hope this has been interesting to you, and that you have yourselves just an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.